different path to Volume 3. As a result, one of my new hopes for this book is diaconal. I have tried to come alongside the seminal work of Augustine and O'Donovan as a translator and teacher, hoping to tease out the implications of their theology for a wider audience of practitioners. So in the decade that I've been at work on the Cultural Liturgies Project, the arc of my thinking has taken me from common grace to antithesis and back to an emphasis on our common life, but with what Paul Ricoeur would call a second naivete, attentive to the deformative power of our political participation, but not willing to give up on the call to love our neighbor by building healthy, just, shared institutions conducive to flourishing. The result, I think, is a reformed public theology that is more Catholic. But I also hope it is now a work that is more constructively helpful to those engaged in the beautiful mess that is our common life, and a resource for those who shepherd such practitioners. That said, this makes no claim to being a handbook for princes or a manual for congressional staffers, nor is this anything close to the last word. I can already see a more fine-grained book I want to write on an implicit theology of public policy. But my hope is that this book provides a new frame for political theology and public engagement that moves us beyond the post-fundamentalist need for permission, the good of politics, as well as the understandable suspicion of liberalism and the state, the so-called Benedict option. Refusing both activism and quietism, we face the task of learning how to actively wait in the meantime of the saeculum. Every political theology is exorcising demons. The question is, which demons? At the beginning of the Cultural Liturgies Project, I was wrangling with the effects of Kuyperian triumphalism, or at least a particular evangelical rendition of such. Today, it's the surprise of Trumpism and a newly energized white nationalism. Tomorrow? Who knows what rough beast will come slouching our way. But this generational context perhaps explains why, for many political theologians of my generation, the work of Stanley Hauerwas has been both a launching pad and a foil. Reading Resident Aliens is a kind of Rorschach test. The way a mainline Methodist reads it will be different from the way someone like me, an evangelical of sorts in the Reformed tradition, does. An heir of a certain version of Abraham Kuyper, encouraged to transform culture, I learned from Hauerwas and Williman how often, under the banner of cultural transformation, we end up with cultural assimilation. It wasn't until I read Resident Aliens that I realized I lacked a functional ecclesiology. Hauerwas and Williman woke me up to a sense that the Church has its own cultural center of gravity. We didn't have to figure out how to hook up Christ with culture, because the body of Christ is a culture, and specifically a formative culture. For those of us breaking out of fundamentalism, the Reformed tradition offered a common grace license that enabled us to say yes to culture. But in our new enthusiasm for affirmation, we tended to lose the other side of Kuyper's philosophy, an emphasis on antithesis. And as North American evangelicals, we tended to be deaf to Kuyper's own thicker ecclesiology. So Resident Aliens was apocalyptic for me in the sense of unveiling the deformative power of those other spheres of life we were so eager to affirm and transform. Many of my generation, I think, received this antithesis as a dichotomy, church instead of state. We would devote ourselves to setting up an alternative polis, the liberal democratic state be damned. I don't think this was the author's intention, but their rhetoric didn't do much to curb that conclusion. But a funny thing happened on the way to the church as polis. Rereading Augustine's City of God alongside the work of Oliver O'Donovan and Peter Leithart, I can now imagine being a resident alien and invested in the state, in all of its glorious failing. The antithesis is always ad hoc, and the Spirit can bend political orders. You might say that, ironically, Resident Aliens brought me to a new, highly qualified appreciation of Christendom, not in the sense of a diminished civil religion, but in O'Donovan's robust sense of a society that bears the crater marks of the gospel's impact. Charles Marsh's account of the civil rights movement in The Beloved Community was a catalyst in this respect. He described a resident alien community that hoped its specifically Christian witness
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.